All right, so for those of you who don't know me or follow me, or just like maybe watching this video later, I'll do a quick introduction to myself, and then I'll let Dan, my mentor, introduce himself. My name is Brooks Patton, and I was a lead instructor at Galvanize. I am back to being a software developer full-time again. Before that, I was doing software development for about a year or so purely. And then before that, I was a senior systems administrator working on creating shell scripts, automating things, programming little system stuff while working at NASA as a contractor. So now I am learning Rust, the language, not the game, and I want to improve my skills as a software developer, bring myself solidly up into that senior level, and then I also want to increase my skills with Rust by making a game. And so on my stream I've been sort of working towards that in the last couple episodes, and I'm meeting with Dan today in order to talk about my plan and any things that I need to know before I move on with that. So Dan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dan Levy. I am a lead instructor at Galvanize. I've been coding for more time than I care to remember, and I only know Rust a little bit. I got familiar with it way back when it was fresh and new, and they were changing how to define integers, and so I'm a little rusty. Pun not intended, I swear. And yeah, I'm a contributor to Docker, and I'm really excited to do some security or architecture work, and yeah, let's figure out what we can build.
All right. And of course, while I'm sort of doing this for myself, also, if you have any questions at any time, put them in. We may not get to them right away, but we'll try to answer them by the end. And we don't really have a set time, but I'm guessing around half an hour to an hour or so.
Yeah, we'll play by ear.
Yeah, we'll play by ear. So I want to go through like the general architecture, like the general idea of the game again with you, Dan, which is this is going to be a battle royale for bots. It's going to be asynchronous. So there's going to be a web interface that we'll have up here. So this will be the web. Hopefully you can sort of read off of there. And this is where like you'll have authentication. I'm going to have a Rust web server running this. I'm thinking about just using native JavaScript, not necessarily going with React or any front-end framework with this, and just doing back-end rendering because more Rust stuff. Also, because of the learning project and the type of project it is, I don't think it's going to attract that many users, especially right off the front. So I don't think I need to worry about scaling the backend that much. I'm not sure.
We can cross that scaling bridge when we get there.
Okay, yeah. And so this will be a Rust server, most likely with Actix Web, that will handle all the API, handle the authentication, and everything else. And people would sign in with GitHub. So we'll just put a GitHub here. And then register a bot through a GitHub repo that they have, and then their bot would just be the contents of that repo. And I can make sure and say like, hey, your bot, we're assuming that your bot is going to be like main.js, but say if it's JavaScript.
Main.sh or whatever. So
yeah, exactly. So like if they don't run that and I can't run thing, their bot dies because they didn't follow instructions. So the idea is that a bunch of people will submit their bots, and maybe I'll code a bunch of AI bots myself, and we'll store like the locations of those into the database. So now we need a database over here. I am of course thinking of using Postgres because Postgres, right? So this will hold the repos, the repo locations, and then
so a list of repos will be a game, essentially, or a
players. They can be a list of players.
But accumulation together, a list of repos is a set of things that will be played against each other? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So have you played a battle royale, or have you seen one like PlayerUnknown Battlefields?
I don't really play video games, which is confusing to people considering the amount of graphics cards I own. So yeah, my experience with games is limited to about Zelda and Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just not that much of a nerd in that way. But-
All right. So what I was thinking is after enough people have signed up, and we have 25 bots that are going to play, then our back end will initialize a spawn. I'm thinking this could be like a separate program that's just a binary that runs, and it can connect to the database also.
Like an orchestrator.
I guess so, like an orchestrator. It is the game essentially.
Okay.
So this would be maybe another Rust application here.
Okay.
And its job is going to spawn in threads programs that then tell these codes, so like execute the code, run the player's codes, and then tell it in turns what the state of the game is.
Just like a process-based actor pattern, kind of?
I guess so. So I'm not too familiar with actors. I saw one video on them and they sound really cool, but I'm not familiar with them yet.
It's like dispatching a set of work to be done, almost like a call or the prompt is like, hey, here,
Okay.
do this work, give me the task results when done. But you can like throw a bunch of them out.
Would also another way to say it be like Lambda functions that have the ability to store state? Like because they're really quick? Okay. Yeah, then in that case, yes. So the way this would work is the game would, let's put this over here. You can sort of see it. Each bot would be in a certain spot. And the bots, each bot would start at they'd all have the same exact capabilities. They all have the same movement, they all have the same speed, they all have the same knowledge and shooting abilities. And there could be drops that they can get that increase their abilities, but they all start on the even level, regardless of how many games they play. And then each turn, so let's say it's this person's turn first. I wish I had colors that worked differently.
Maybe Leanne can go and get the other markers. I can go and get them.
Let's not worry about it right
I
now.
can just run down and it's
But that'll take a while.
I got stopped by students on the way down, that's why it took a while.
Exactly. That's what I
I
don't
can
want.
run down those stairs and sneak in.
But we're streaming.
Okay.
We're doing this. So anyways, it'd be this person's turn, this bot's turn first. And so my main game code would tell that.
I think the way.
Oh, that gets worse.
Is that better?
I think so.
Okay.
It would tell this bot that's running, okay, here is your location, your current location. Here are the locations of the other bots that you can see. And what do you want to do? Here's the current, you have a bullet, so you can fire. That's a true. And then I was thinking of doing, using standard in and standard out. So make it really, really simple.
So you start a process and say your move, and then you respond with either fire or move X or Y.
Right.
Or
So
stay put, maybe you're as prompted.
Yeah,
asked.
like a board game, they can say you have one movement action and you have one fire action.
Okay.
And you can do both of those things, but not a third. You can't do two move actions.
Okay.
So if you have a movement speed of 10 pixels, let's say, then it could say, I want to move over here. And I want to fire by one bullet that I have, towards this, and it can give just coordinates. And my app would just record that, keep its own state about where everything is, and then move on to the next player and say, okay, there's a bullet here. Not tell the velocity of the bullet, just tell it there's a bullet there. Its job would be to determine whether or not it wants to track that bullet over time.
Okay, so each time, so when you get standard in, or when you're starting up the process, you have to give it the lay of the land. So each time on each move, you give it the game state. So give it an ASCII char set.
Yeah.
And then it gets to respond with maybe it's the changed ASCII char set, or maybe just the delta.
I'm thinking of more of coordinates. So it can be standard out, it puts a standard out, a stringified JSON object that would be it'd have two keys essentially, move and a fire. And if fire is null, it's not firing. And if the fire is a location, that's where it's aiming towards and firing towards that.
Okay.
And that would be the complexity of the bot is how it chooses what to do. Does it move? Does it run away because a bullet is coming towards it? It has to track all that stuff though because
it has to know the edges of the boundaries. It has to know how to like corner an enemy or run away from an enemy, or does it even know if an enemy has a bullet, or does it like do they know those things, or
Right.
so like those sorts of things will have to be taken into consideration, and you have to balance. Do you have enough steam to get to a one-up or something, or like, hey, you can pick up a bullet 3 squares away. There's an enemy 2 squares ahead of you and blocking your way.
Right.
So you got to be able to do hazard detection, and there's a few. I smell some algorithms coming up.
So what I'm hoping for is that my game itself, like the engine that runs it, is going to be as simple as possible. It just passes in simple data and gets simple data out, and the complexity comes in the bots. And I'm expecting that my bots will not do very well because I'll be concentrated on doing this.
Totally.
But I really want this to be something that like has the potential to grow really cool and amazing bots.
Yeah, because someone could build a TensorFlow-based learning one that'll actually seek out resources or prioritize kills, or know which strategy is ideal. Like that sort of stuff has a lot of nuance. It's not driven very much.
Or if something, I'm also curious. Well, if something just moves randomly and shoots randomly, would that win more often?
It could. Like that's a lot. Like so, there is a process, a fancy term in machine learning called simulated annealing. And simulated, I think that's the correct. Simulated annealing is basically involves picking a random point on a curve and then trying to find either the peak or the valley, basically by iterating, divide and conquer sort of strategy. So basically, you could use something like that to kind of just draw, like, oh, let's guess and see if this move works out better, and just track which, like, mapping those to each of the layouts.
Yeah.
Just see, very naively, it'd take a lot of data to accumulate, but there's so many ways to do this.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping is that it would, both building this will stretch my abilities, because like I'm not sure how to build it properly yet. But by doing that, then I can build the AIs for it, and that will be another stretch for myself. So like I really kind of want this to exist, even if it falls flat and doesn't, like nobody wants to play it. I still think like it's going to be a worthwhile endeavor for myself.
Totally. Now this involves cool infrastructure stuff, cool like real nerdy challenges for devs.
Yeah, and TRPAP, you asked, does the game engine determine who goes first? I think what I'm going to do is actually have it be turn-based, and it'll just sort of like be a roll for initiative, where the game will roll fair, because I'm not going to trust the bots to roll fairly, and it will be, it'll basically just be random every game who goes first. But I'm going to hope to make it large enough field, pixel-wise, that there's not really a super big advantage to that.
So, like, if you didn't have what's a simpler version of this? Can we make it so that there's almost a unwinnable version where it's just all you are doing is moving around bots and you need to have a user make a mistake? Because it's like, if we just had a thing where you can drive your dot around and kills were just making contact, we could build a really simple model that we could just start from there and then add like bullets or add like one-ups, but just having it so it's only like a coordinate grid, and all you can do is just move, and you're relying on the other player to make a mistake, which is basically how all games work. Like you have to screw up tic-tac-toe to lose. Like it's basically that's how these games work. So like if we just built a super tight, like really restricted model, and if you got a kill, maybe you could do 2 moves instead of 1 for that next turn. Like very simple, like the least amount of variance. There's only one class of player or like unit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and something I've been thinking about is,
not that it would end there. Like it definitely layered on, but like it doesn't. There's a lot of things. Like even with just two things going on here with a bullet and a moving piece, I can still like do bullets go over the edge of the map and come around? Do they get lost? Like what's the? There's a ton of questions that just adding a bullet adds to things that it's just extra complexity. And if we can tighten that down at first, it makes it a lot smoother as we scale and we understand the problem space better.
Yeah, you're talking about like essentially the MVP, like the minimum absolutely to do.
Minimum plausible product.
Before we can get users on the platform and then have them alpha test that and then move forward from there.
Yeah, because if it's just a bunch of dots like, looking like Conway's Game of Life, like just buzzing around, that may not be that interesting or exciting, but it's a proof of concept of this model as a platform, for coders to compete via code.
Yeah, no, I think like the first step might be for me to set it up where it's just players that come on to the game map and they just randomly move around, and that's it. Like there's no bullets, there's no fighting. Maybe it's just one player and they just move around forever by themselves.
Well, there's also the challenge of if it's a hidden map and you need to understand, like, to figure out how big it is. I can't remember the term, but there's a specific area of game research where just identifying map exploration and identifying, building up that data, the vector space of where you can go and where the dungeons are or where the goodies are, where the exits are. All those sorts of things when you've got a limited visibility map. You remember the Mario game where you can only see the spotlight?
Yeah.
Doing that is a common thing. Like if you write a code for a robot like car that has to do pathfinding, or like a Roomba, it goes and explores its space and has to learn. That has a lot of applications all over there. And so if we just had a single dot that had to explore the space and tell us the shape, it's kind of a mix of like a Dijkstra's algorithm, there's a lot of really advanced stuff just in that simple problem.
What do you think if I concentrated first on like the entire thing is visible, all players are visible for like the first iteration through, and that would allow me to concentrate on like the engine part of it running, and then once I get the engine working, I can change the game around and like try to keep them separate, where I could change this without it affecting the engine part. It just makes the bots have to update.
Yeah, because like when you're sending a game state to the bot or to the repo standard in, you have to describe the layout, and that'll include either like X's for the players or like maybe like numbers, just an ASCII grid of blank spaces. But then you've got what happens if you add bullet stashes or hit points or move fast potions, whatever. Those sorts of things, if the client doesn't recognize it, like maybe we could write out sort of hey, these sorts of things may be in the list of inventory that you get in your game state. Not now, this one line is available now. All these other states are coming soon, so at least people know what's on the horizon. Like at least, because obviously we're gonna have one-ups of some kind. Just we want to feel out the base version first.
So that's what you're talking about, is basically being nice to the bot makers.
Yeah.
Because like I could build it all out, and then I said like, hey everybody, I'm now hiding your vision for you can only see like a 200 feet around you now.
And now you've got to
and like you now need to rewrite your bots from scratch, and like that would potentially be upsetting to people. I guess like for me, what would be is I might want to
have to version it too. Like it'd have to be, but at least giving them telegraphing, being like, hey, this is what we're heading to at V0.
Well, luckily, I'm not planning on charging for this game, so I'm not going to do like any kind of early access thing. But I think what you're talking about is potentially creating a list of features, that I want.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with coming up with a ambitious roadmap, but the next step is basically crossing everything out and coming up with just like your first step.
So basically, the features for alpha to be complete, essentially. And then once I have those, we can start moving into like really
if you switch from planning mode to agile mode, it's like, okay, here's the grand scheme of things, or the grand layout, grand vision of where things could be. But because we don't have a crystal ball, we're going to go and do agile methodology and focus on the thin vertical slices and deliver product. And the thin vertical slice is probably a visible map with just players, and contact is a kill.
But as long as people know that eventually these will be coming, they then hopefully wouldn't be upset when like, hey, by the way, now you can't see everybody.
Or they may be able to contribute and send PRs to add these features, so that they know we can build consensus or get the community involved.
This will be open source, so that is a possibility. Now, that's sort of like the gameplay side of things. Something that I'm the most concerned about is security. If I am going to be allowing code written by complete strangers on the internet to be run on my server,
nothing could possibly go wrong. This sounds like a great plan. I don't see any potential issues whatsoever.
Of course, right. And actually, before we move on to this section, we have TFlow7. Yeah, kudos to you, Dan, for keeping it simple. A call out to Terrarium, built by Microsoft to build an animal or create a code and interact with the world and other creatures. Those upcoming features are effectively your product roadmap. Yeah.
I got this.
Oh, you got chat like at a bigger.
Yeah, instead of reading off your phone, I think
All right,
this
then
might
I can close this thing down now.
be- Yep.
All right, that's so much nice. You can actually put that right here. So I mean, those are really good points. I can create the roadmap, and I can create sort of like a documentation shell that's going to have all the endpoints in it that then like may of course change, and I'll have those updated with each version, and that's part of the thin vertical slice. All right, so on to the security part. My initial thought was using Docker for this because I'm not, and I guess like that's the first question. Is Docker a good choice for hosting the code and sandboxing it so that it's in its own little window in its thread, and then trying to lock it down in there, or are there other systems?
I would build a custom image that uses a very locked down user account. We'd use all the security restrictions, limiting network access, limiting.
So you're saying some custom image, so like not using like the Ubuntu or Node or Rust image, but like building myself with something like Alpine or some other like extremely locked down.
And Ubuntu now is really small and like only double the size of the 30 meg Alpine or 50 meg. Like, it's down to pretty small. It's just when you start installing packages, it starts bloating on both sides. The issue, we're going to use a custom user. There are kernel options. There are things in the kernel we can do on the host. So if we're going to run our own box for this, there are things you can do to really limit basically anything that they can do. You can do like just limiting the network access, making sure that the disk is not real, that it's completely isolated. And there are Jesse Frazzle is a master engineer at. I think she used to work at Microsoft and just joined GitHub. I may be wrong, but she's a legend in the Docker community and is responsible for my first Docker commit. Like she was instrumental in helping me make a fix to the install script in Docker for some Debian compatibility issue. And she went over and above to explain things that I'd never even heard of, like LSB, like Linux system base. I think that's what it was. All that stuff. She is the master who's taught me everything. All her blog is solid gold for security on this stuff. So that's basically the game plan. Use Frazzle Dazzle's resources and we'll be set. I just gave away the recipe. Here, let me show.
And then go ahead and put that into chat.
Yeah, let me.
Did we lose chat?
It's on the. I've got it here.
Of course you can't.
I'm not a bot. Okay, maybe I'm a robot.
Oh, nope, you're not a bot. It knows you're not a bot.
I fooled it enough there.
I love how it has to refresh the screen after you log in.
Come on.
So go ahead. Twitch resets like chat gets removed.
Oh, I can't see the refresh.
Like the history, yeah.
That's cool. Thanks,
who was it? Oh, I can't do that because I logged out of this one too. I
Okay,
can't
I just
remember, but
posted-
you had a question that was why Docker and not DS something? Can you re-ask that last question?
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Why Docker and not a custom DSL for implementing a bot?
Well, the DSL would probably be tightly coupled to a language, or would need other adapters to bridge to other languages.
Let's first ask, what's DSL?
Domain-specific language, and that is a way to. So Docker files are a domain-specific language. They are
a custom way to describe things that do wrap other things like shell commands. They do build on other programming primitives. But it is a specific, its domain is container specifications, and Docker files encapsulate that well.
So basically, I think what you're asking, Tiflo, is should I make my own sort of very small, compact language in order to allow people to not be able to violate security, because the language itself wouldn't have anything that's dangerous. Like, it would have only things that you could do very, very simple things like.
That's basically, we are going to have a DSL in effect in the input and output. So the input and output is going to be a standard way of giving instructions, giving the game state as a payload of an input string. So there is kind of a DSL, not in the traditional way perhaps. However, what's powerful about this is if we allow just repos to run just a main.sh, a shell script, you could use any language. It would allow people to experiment and test the limits of different programming languages. Like, you could do this, you could write a bot literally in Bash, no other languages. You could use Python and TensorFlow. You could use JavaScript and Brain.js and do neural nets there. You can do, like, we don't want to limit the options, but if we can hem in the amount of memory used, the amount of CPU used, and the time executed, and the network access to 0, that eliminates data exfiltration as a risk, or being able to execute payloads and launch attacks. Now, there are other security vectors to be concerned about, but that'll cover like 80% of what the low-hanging fruit.
I guess the big thing for me is I want this to be a game for learning new languages. And when I think about learning new language, I think about going to Advent of Code, which is about to start up, a coding game, Code Wars, things like that, HackerRank, where you have these problems and you work on your code. This to me feels like it would just be another one of those, except it's more dynamic. And
there's no it's a black box sort of advantage where the rules aren't there. The rules are just at the interface, at the standard in and standard out. However you handle that is up to you. Like, if you have a quantum computer at your disposal, okay, I guess we would need it on our end to run it. But this is the idea that if you've got some novel idea or crazy way to attack this sort of a problem, we want to enable that. And because it'd be through GitHub, we'd just advance the open source cause.
Well, I guess that's an idea, is all the bots would have to be open source. There's no private bots allowed, so therefore, if something does happen, there would be a record of it.
Absolutely.
Existing, and people will be able to see that. But yeah, so that's the thing. And Tifo, you're correct. Security is a huge focus, which is the reason why I'm talking to Dan before I started building this thing, because I could see myself coming close, but messing up one or two settings, and therefore leaving massive vulnerabilities open. And definitely when I actually implement it, I would love to pair with you on that to make sure that I'm doing it properly.
And we should reach out. I know there's several people in the community that have tackled this problem, that I've interacted with on Twitter. Maybe not, I can't say friends, but people who have chatted with, we've discussed similar issues. I know the people at Replit, they basically run a similar infrastructure. You can go online and run Python, C#, you can run anything. It runs on I believe, on a similar thing like this. There are a whole family of transpilers for every language basically to JavaScript. They're this weird area of abilities. So I did see there's a lot of in-browser compilers for simple expressions. You can write C++ and have it give you answers or the results in your browser using a JavaScript intermediary layer. It's not supposed to be fast, it's not going to do anything fancy, but it executes it locally. So there are ways that we can maybe say, hey, JavaScript, or hey, we're going to run it through this JavaScript layer. We're not going to really support native packages. You could just use the syntax. That would eliminate, we would gain a lot of control. But I think that those aren't as well established, and being able to just execute a container where people can access, they can use the file system to store things in their isolated image. So they do have persistence, but they don't have a volume mount. It's all local, and when the game's over, those images are nuked.
So there needs to be some persistence, but it needs to be ephemeral.
Yeah, well, I can see that working also, but those probably cost a bunch too.
I mean, it depends like how much we're storing. Like, if it's a map thing, like you're not talking even megs. Like, but if you're having to like
Hopefully not.
explore a map and store like data, you're gonna have to balance like optimizing, storing either a vector map or a literal square by square map of everything. You're like everything can be very intense, and if you're storing previous games' history, or if you want to store models, you maybe have to store them in your repo.
Well, so previous like game histories and that kind of stuff will be going into the database. So like I could have.
So we can give give them the data from their previous games, so they can use AI like training on it. Basically.
Yeah, what I was thinking of is like games would be just an array. Like a game would be an array of actions that is from the standard out of each bot, and then as soon as the game is done, like that would be uploaded to my database, which would then become available on the web. And then I was thinking of because this is going to be a web thing, that there's going to be a sort of a web view where you can watch a replay of the game as if it was live, but it's really just a replay of these actions going through.
Artificial delays. Yeah.
Well, with actually like removing whatever delays there were, or maybe artificial delays to let you slow it down to like watch, like how did my bot do?
Yeah.
Like, oh, it reached up to this point and then suddenly it's not working anymore.
So here's a question.
Are the states of the bots maintained in the distributed manner? What are the capabilities of a bot, and how do those capabilities affect the state of other bots?
So the only way I would imagine state getting passed to between bots or knowing about other like enemies. So I don't think you'd have a swarm of bots, at least initially, because coordinating like, your team data to multiple nodes, that's a lot of work in a whole can of worms. But passing in the game state on each turn, so that every time you get a fresh standard in execution, that's when you get your lay of the land. It tells you where all the baddies are, or where your opponents are, and where you are, and you can just make a decision on where you want to move from there. That, and you do it by outputting a standard out, saying like 0, 1, and then it just move off by one piece or one unit.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm thinking about is you're only allowed, like a player is a bot. It can't be like a bunch of bots working together to choose how one player goes. If you submit 5 bots, those 5 bots are 5 individual players who are able to see each other. And the way I think about that is if you join something like...
I guess there's nothing stopping you from making your bots like aware of me. I guess unless we don't identify them.
They can't be because, well, okay, I'm hoping they can.
If we gave a get URL for each player as an index, then you could coordinate with your other bots, which would be an interesting idea. But
I'm not sure how they would, because what will happen is they'll be inside of a container. Each one will be in its own container.
But if each time you're getting a play and all you have is like numbers for each of the different items,
there's no IDs given for the other bots.
You need that.
So you don't need. So like the idea was
the simple version.
Player
This is
unknowns
an
battlefields.
interesting
Like you could be playing with like the #1 player in the world. You don't know it until they kill you. Then you find out. But you're gone. You're done. You can't interact with that game anymore.
Okay.
So you don't find out how your bot did until after the game happened, and you get to watch the results.
Okay.
So I think I'll keep that one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea, and it can't that is really interesting. Like the way to do that, it could be done without having intercommunication or anything, and it would force you to do some really innovative, like state management between. You'd have really. You'd have to deal with the machine learning challenges of isolated states and trying to aggregate the. My words are failing me. Like I can't remember what this stuff's called, but it's a really specialized problem when you've got giant slices of data and you're trying to make decisions based on not having to move everything into one location.
Yeah. You're asking if bots take their turns auto-magically. I think the answer is kind of yes. What I would hope to do is that they're all at the beginning. I'm going to only support Node, and then right after that will be Python, like the 2 big languages that most people are familiar with. And the idea was that they'll have infinite loops running, listening to standard in. And so I will hand them standard in, and like every time it comes in, like they don't know if it's been 5 minutes since their last turn, or suddenly they just know it's their next turn, and it goes. They have no idea who died, who didn't die. They just have a list of the current game states. And if they're a complex bot, they've been storing internal state to their own memory about what is going on.
Yeah, they
but
know where
they're
the
still
bad guys
blind.
are tracking. They know if they're heading their way or going elsewhere, or maybe they're going to go off the edge of the map and come and just suddenly appear behind you. So if they're supervised or unsupervised, I mean that's something that's an implementation detail on the, for the bot.
My thoughts are, because it's going to be an open source project, there would be nothing stopping somebody from downloading the entire ecosystem and setting up their own server and then running 100 bots of their own and fighting them together, taking the top one and automatically scripting that until eventually get one that kills each other. But also and everybody else's bots will be on open source GitHub. They can pull other people's bots into practice against. That could be a way for somebody to get really power leveled, which might lead me to have to create a leveling system where I track, a bot is doing really good, so therefore I'm going to try to put them match them with other winners and have a matchmaking system similar to Blizzard with StarCraft. But that might be in the future. Yes, to your Pap, I think that is an accurate sort of statement.
And the consistency, availability, partitioning. This is basically going to be executed serially. There's the consistency, the availability. I mean, if it were to fail mid-state and restart, we'd have the last turn stored in Postgres and then just be able to pick up where it last left. I don't. It's not like we're losing bank transactions here, so I'm not terribly worried about it.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because this is my first game, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, but allow the complexity of something amazing at the same time.
Yeah, that is handled in the user module like that.
Right.
I love the beauty of that.
So the entire idea is that I want it to be where you can play by making the simplest bot possible. It doesn't care about the state of the game at all. Maybe it even just ignores standard in, and it just says I move this way and I fire. That's it.
It's maybe just a randomized game of luck, and then we iterate.
Yeah, and then there could be ones that try to write really, really complex ones, and then we just play around with it.
Yeah, we could add mayhem bots that just are there, just going nuts in there, just to add some spice to the mix.
Yeah, but the big thing is, and this is why I want to do this project, is because my skills will level up quite a bit from both writing the engine part and also sort of analyzing what happens when people's unfamiliar code gets run in my engine. Mm-hmm. So there's the standard in, standard out. That's how they're listening. We're going to lock it down. I'm going to keep all these things in mind. Is there any other things that I need to worry about locking down?
Oh, I'm sure. There's always something that just is just when you think you've locked down your CPU, Spectre comes out. You're just what? How is any of this ever secure? But it's more about putting in that effort and keeping on pushing forward on that and making sure the security is not something you achieve or get done. It's constantly moving.
Would a potential traditional VMs be better to use? Like Vagrant or no?
The people that sell those would tell you yes. But no. It would add a lot of, you'd have speed issues. There is a different isolation model for sure, but it's the significance of it, and if you tell me that you can't jailbreak or break out of a VM or hypervisor, I've got a bridge to sell you.
So basically, I have a choice of lots of different problem systems.
Wait, was that Patrick? Hey, Patrick, what's up? That's Pig Lacquer over here. Okay, I think we're missing some messages here. Yeah, VMs are super heavy. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, and Tifo, you're right. There's a lot of other container technologies I happen to know a lot about Docker, and I've been using it for like over 4 years. And I've done a lot of large deployments, thousands and thousands of containers. Actually, by these days standards, that's probably a baby amount, but still, like, so I'm by no means a Docker security like master, but I do know who is, and Jesse Fraser.
So basically, when I get to this stage of it,
Yeah, no, it's
we'll reapproach this and
Yeah.
take. Well, I mean, to begin with, I'm only running my bots, so I don't have to worry about security at the initial stage of it. But when we start like taking in like an alpha, pre-alpha build, and I start like allowing people to alpha test it, then that's when we're going to start having.
Like, the big risk that I'm concerned about would be if you're allowed like running someone else's code, you just don't want them like mounting attacks against like banks or sending spam or just outbound network access is the most, like, the biggest risk. Now, of course, if they break out of the Docker container, then they can make a break for it and do anything on your operating system.
Yeah, if they get root access, it's over.
Yeah, so like that risk exists in any kind of isolation or containering like tooling. Yes, and Jesse goes way deeper than that, like down to syscalls and down to like, she can go so deep on this stuff. It is just absolutely impressive.
Maybe if I make my engine good enough and I get to that point that it's interesting enough, maybe I can. Maybe she'll be willing to chat with me about it.
Yeah. Well, if she just started a new job, I don't know, man. She's probably gonna be busy.
It will probably take me a while to get here.
Yeah,
so
fair enough. Oh, hey, Columbia, Carlos Spy 81.
awesome. Yeah. I'm glad I'm able to be live for you.
And there's a rail car. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's just there are lots of other container techs. It's just I know Docker and Linux and how they interact very well, and I know I've actually done a lot of work experimenting with various exploits and jailbreaking out of your containers. So I do know how some of those things work, or at least way back in the old days when those vectors were a little bit easier. But they do require certain conditions to be just right. If we apply a lot of restrictions on the container policy, like those things, like I don't even think those old exploits would have worked if you locked down your net and your locked down file system access only to a specific, even virtual path. Like,
Well, I want to lock it down completely so they can't store state in the file. They have to do it all in memory.
I mean, we could also give them a specific local API so that it's only like, hey, a key value store. That's all you get. You get a key value API, and we will handle it. That's the only allowed persistence. So
Yeah.
like, there's other ways we can really constrain it.
So you're asking about, is this code that, so this is a great sort of leeway into like how
You want to see the game like this?
So this could be, that's the next question, like maybe the end of sort of where I have going for today, which is like my own roadmap of how to get through this, because this is a lot. Like, it doesn't look too much because it's just on a single whiteboard, but there's a lot of stuff in each of these boxes. My initial thought is to sort of begin with the end and create the GitHub, create the web server, create the auth system first, because auth first is like adding an auth to a project that exists is terrible. I've done that before; it sucks.
Yeah.
But once I get all that stuff and have players be able to submit their repos and then store that as a database, then what I'm thinking of doing is pretend to play a game with maybe 2 bots and have them move around and shoot at each other and do a couple different things with all of the features that I would initially have. Maybe make it a very short game because that would suck. I'm going to create the JSON file, the array of moves that would happen, and manually create one of those. and then create the front end visualization of the game first. Like that would literally be the first part of the game, is play the game that never got played, but just me creating this turn set. Do you think that that would be the better first step for me to do? Or focus on the Rust side, build the engine, and have an actual like back-end visualization of the game and then do it for real?
I mean, I was thinking of doing like the actual writing almost tests to simulate sending standard in and standard out, and just giving hard-coded results and just like building it off that, so we can build up the behavior, so that we make sure that the connecting layer between the third-party code and us is well-defined and very stable and constrained at first. That way, we at least know that, like, that's the brittle part. That's the piece that, you know, they could throw garbage at. They could, like, oh, if you needed to put the word fire in uppercase, but you put it in lowercase, do we send a standard error message out? Do we exit code? Those things need to be defined. So I would like make it just a set of either unit or whatever kind of flavor testing we would do from the sort of input-output tests.
So maybe like build the basic engine first, and then my idea was I was going to use GGEasy as a visualizer. So the idea would be normally wouldn't need to visualize this because it's just run on a headless server and do the games, the turns, and then visualize it on the front end. But for testing purposes, I could have the actual game engine. It can like if you pass an environment variable, let's say, it will render an actual video of it happening live. And so like, okay, this spot's turn, it moves here. This spot's turn, it moves there. And maybe building that first might be the best thing to do.
I mean, even if it's just an ASCII grid of characters of just like a bunch of spaces with either dashes or X's, you could just update that into a web page, and that could be the interface.
So I know how to do this because I've already done the spike test to like build one of these out.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I actually I can do this pretty easily.
But Tiflo's saying like here I guess confirming. So yeah, we do the acceptance test like with just testing dummy data. So yeah, to swallow every misinterpretation for garbage data. That's what I'm saying. Like I think we need to decide: do we want exit codes to indicate that you almost got it right, or maybe you entered the fire command but didn't tell us where? Maybe do we want to bother giving you more helpful errors? I mean, it's something that's often overlooked early in apps, but it's easy to pay attention to the error messaging and do a good job on it if you keep your scope tight. So if we're only having players move on a 2D grid and they interact or they go off the edge, then the error is out of bounds. And then you can explain you went off the left side of the grid. Right away, we started off with great error messages, and then we can iterate and keep building on that.
Okay, so it sounds to me like what might be best is not even build this side here. So I have like my web front end, I have my web back end, and I have the Rust game engine. It can just be a compiled binary that it runs, and it will grab from the database the list of repos and go. So I could basically have it just build this part first and then add in all these other sections after I get the basic part working.
The collection, the thing that'll actually assemble the list of challengers.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, I would definitely tackle this piece and start writing standard and like just mock up like a dummy, just like the dummy data, and just do cheap and easy smoke tests basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not. That's another thing that's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how to write automated tests for something that works with standard in and standard out like that.
Yeah, I can. So there are got some old friends who've done some similar stuff, basically doing standard in, standard outs, and error checks because that's the only interface they had to some integrated hardware at a power company. So that was all they had to work with. There was no nice API. You had streams of just either binary or text, and you could switch. Like it was a crazy interface, but they actually did a really good job at buttoning that down. Yeah, people underestimate the power of dummy data. Like, you don't want to go to all the effort to make some intricately designed database that supports all these features and one-ups and different kinds of objectives, and then you find that they're too hard to implement fully, or they weren't needed, or whatever, and then you're wasting time. But like starting with the fake data first makes it so you can feel out what's going to look like, what it's capable of, and how it's going to feel. Like you can simulate a static list of hard-coded moves and just see how it changes. Like look at it move and just, did the hard-coded version even come close to what we hoped it would? Because if that doesn't add up, maybe it'll be clear then that we need to focus on projectiles versus one-ups, or maybe it's just a game of tag with one-ups that you race to. Like we won't be able to make that decision on which is a better next step until we've got that dummy data and a better feel for how it's going to put together.
So it sounds like the best first step for me to do would be build this binary first, ignore the website part of it, ignore the database, build a Rust binary that it will have a dummy hard-coded like JavaScript file, like program that listens to standard in and just like outputs random stuff whenever I send it something, and then just slowly take that and iterate.
I'd like actually like give it fixed states. And
like move up, like
almost describing like, okay, if I say move up, this is like the hard-coded like ASCII grid of what's going to change. If I zoom down, this is the outcome, and then you just write code to match that. Or make sure the orchestrator here can receive that and commit the state changes, and can deal with someone trying to cheat. They're like, move up twice.
Yeah, so I could basically do like the most simplest node-based bot that would play the game. One that just simply says like move down 10 pixels or whatever. And this...
You could also do it by just grid blocks, and you don't even give it an amount. So it's like you move up, you move down, left, you move right. There's no number, there's just that, or maybe diagonal, just that would make it so it's very, simple, like you could read that code in a couple lines and it's clear, it's easy to spot shenanigans.
Hopefully. And then I could basically get the visual aspect of that working with one bot, then I can add a second one where it's also moving the exact same on the other side, let's say. And then from there on, we just start adding complexity in until we have...
So we can feel out what makes sense.
Until we have something that makes sense. And then I can start, once I have like a game where I can essentially play it by manually handing it the repos, then we can build all the other stuff that supports it.
And then just run it a few hundred times, record the output, see how much variance we get, see if there's enough randomization, because then that'll also inform how many one-ups we want to add, because throwing those in, or how many of those get seeded in the game, or do they vanish or expire, or do they move? Like things like that will add to will add some excitement to the mix.
I think the bot receives data from the engine. Yeah, I'm gonna try to make it so there's very little data that gets handed from the engine to that, and the bot doesn't. I want the bot not to have to know how the game is being implemented. All it has to worry about is just itself. Just like when you go to play the game, you don't have to worry that like when you press your mouse button that it's going to fire the bullet. You just know that like this is what you can do, and you just do it, and you can't do anything outside of the game.
Yeah, it definitely does like cellular automata. I keep imagining Conway's Game of Life, but like that would actually be an interesting way to deal with a team strategy, or dealing with like a actual growth. Like if your unit from 4 can become 2 units and 3, like then you have to deal with the whole strategy in a whole different dimension. That actually is a really fascinating area of computing.
But I'm not gonna let the players split.
No, this would be something that you would control. Like you'd be able to be like, oh, you got a bonus that makes you ×2. So now it's almost like the Pac-Man like speed up mode. It's like, hey, you can get this one up that gives you the special ability of a special outcome.
Maybe like there could be lots of things we can play. I think I think part of like doing this part first, which is creating this Rust engine, creating like the game that would play with just a few simple bots, would allow me to start creating a list of features that's going to be made. And once I have like the very, very basic parts of it, I could build everything else around it, and then sort of like do the thin vertical slices across the entire stack.
Yeah, and you're right, Tifo. the cellular automata is really about it's an autonomous a cell. The Conway is a variety of fixed rules that can randomly, or not random, but they will cause growth, or I'm forgetting my words. I can literally visualize the different flavors of it, whether it's single dimensions or you have different rules that cause different types of cells to propagate. So what are the consequences of like a bot hitting a target or a? So I mean, all those things could add a little bit of complexity. Like if you're trying to calculate the best way to capture like 3 pieces, if you see them in a line, but if capturing the first one like bounces you back, or like you start at the first spot, like that kind of ruins your ability to strategically do it, or you've got to rethink how you do that.
I think that'll be essentially documentation will be important with this, because as people will need to know like how the game is going to act, and like if I were to say like if you go 10 pixels over to the right of an edge of like the world, do you end up 10 pixels back because you bounced off, or do you just end up sitting at the edge and you just can't move past it?
Or can you like hide out and snipe suckers that are not aware you're at? Or like there's all kinds of stuff that we could propose. But I think maybe we should just have like polls or some like voting system to say like to collect ideas like pull requests. Like, hey, here's one idea, here's one shape. I mean, you could map this sort of a game on top of Conway's Game of Life and make it a whole like, hey, you got to race the cellular growth system. Like all crazy ideas are possible.
Yeah, so TR Pap, you have a good point where like, yeah, you don't think the boundary. So I think like all of those are starting to come close to like implementation details, which so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think just doing the part where I have the Rust engine and I have like the game on the back end be visually played, where I can see like 1 or 2 bots just move around randomly, is like step 1. And once I have that, I build like all this other stuff around it so people can add their own bots. And then I start adding features in of like, now you can fire a bullet. Now you can like
wrap around the map.
Now you can do whatever you want. Now you can do these other things. And then once I start adding features, that's when I can maybe start doing polling of like, what features should we add and in what order? So that way when I finish one, I can then choose another one to go with. And instead of like having a release where I'm like, hey, we now have like these 5 features, here you go. It's just more of like, I'm working on this, I just push it up, it's immediately available.
So, Tiflo, you're trying to, the MVP is just literally going to be single, like, however many bots we put on the map, all they can do is move, like a game of tag. However, so that's the absolute MVP. All the other stuff we're discussing is just to bring to light the possibilities and like the trade-offs and how like all these advances or complexities that we mix in, they'll affect our data persistence, how much we're going to need to allow. If you need to store pre-train a machine learning or a neural net like training model, those files can get big. Probably not for something with this kind of a limited dimension. But like all those things kind of like have to be considered. Like, are we gonna be importing like 200 meg GitHub repos with models in them? Does that eat up all the space we allowed? So we're just kind of kicking around ideas to just see what's potential. Like we're, part of it's just fun. We're gonna shoot the shit, talk about tech and what's possible.
Tifo, I think you're right. It's going to be something like a 3x3 grid, or maybe a little bit larger, where they just move like really small movements, but
it's like combat tic-tac-toe.
My idea is like once you build that, scaling it out is just changing some numbers in the file, as opposed to like writing entire like new algorithms and routines. Creating the full new features is going to be where it gets like, okay, this is going to be a significant undertaking to like even add the ability to shoot each other, because there might be a lot of things to take into account for that. Part of that will be the bots stuff, but part of that will be the how to tell the bots to move. But yeah, so
and like
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, that's exactly what the
Tifa.
MVP. Like that's so any of the other stuff we're talking about, just to be clear, is speculation. And,
It's hype. It's ways to get excited about the things that will come potentially a year from now. Because like I don't know how long this will take me. This is the first game, like a real game that I've made, and every time that I look at other people who are making games, I ask them, and like they're like, oh, I've been working on it for like 2 years. And I'm like, oh, okay. This is gonna take a while, isn't it?
Nice. Yeah, that seems exciting. There means definitely.
How do I manage the state of the field of play? I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, and I'm going to use structs. Basically, the equivalent of like JSON objects for JavaScript.
And it's all going to be managed by the orchestrator Rust thing that is going to use standard in to feed the change on each turn. It will feed the new state back, so it knows what the enemies did.
Right.
So it's a very, each time you will be given what you need to do to make your decision. You make your decision.
Yeah, there are many ways to skin this cat. Basically, the orchestrator, whatever I name this sort of binary bot, or not bot, this binary is it's going to care. It's going to be like not caring about the game. It's just going to say like, here's where everybody is. Like here's their locations.
It's going to feed that state and ask each one which move it's doing, and then apply that change in like a finite state machine or like a immutable set of state changes.
Right.
So it'll be replayable, nothing magical or crazy going on.
Well, and I don't think it's going to be a multi-way merge because I'm not going to let the bots, for complexity's sake, have simultaneous turns.
This is definitely serial.
I'm going to make this serial by like, if you're lucky and you roll for your initiative and like this one is first, if it, and this is the reason why I'm going to have bullet speed in it, because if the bullet is just like instantaneous, he could just kill everybody right away. But if he like has to fire a bullet and it only goes like 25 pixels out, and somebody else is 500 pixels away that they're being shot at, they're going to get a turn before that bullet will also will only move on like maybe that person's turn, meaning that they'll have plenty of time to try to avoid that bullet if they know it's coming towards them.
Yeah, and if the players can only move up, down, left, and right, you can do things like the bullets can move in any direction. They can move diagonally as well. Yeah, real time can come later. There's other games for that. This is a
serial first, then later.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Mainly because this entire thing is already going to stretch my capabilities to the edge. Adding in a real time component will probably once I finish this and I feel like I want 2.0 of this, then I can do real time.
That's a whole different ball. Oh, actually, yeah. Stop trolling us. Thank you much. Is this Docker?
You missed the Docker part. We were talking about, so basically we have some list of things that I wrote down of what I'm going to have to keep in mind when running strange people's code from the internet in a Docker container while locking it down. And sort of what we came up with is it should be a custom image that I take from the base one that Docker provides, or something like
Ubuntu or Alpine or something.
Ubuntu, Alpine, or Red Hat's Core OS, which is really locked down. And would you also suggest that I compile everything from source, or go that level of low?
I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know if that gives us any better security posture.
Okay, so
from scratch.
Basically, if I use something like a Red Hat based system, which theirs is locked down really tight by default, I could then use Yum to install the stuff.
Yum's dead.
Oh, is Yum dead?
Yeah, it's now like DNF or.
Okay, well that shows how long it's been since I've used Red Hat stuff.
Yeah, no, I was thrilled that.
Okay, that's a dead. Okay, fine, not that one. I'll use.
Yeah, no, we'll use.
Alpine is probably the best. Okay, so I could use Alpine.
Ubuntu doesn't have the same bloat by default that it used to, and Alpine isn't I don't know if you've tried ever installing a whole bunch of services or command line things into an Alpine package. You basically end up coming and running around and only ending up with an image a little smaller than what you would have had with Ubuntu. In Ubuntu's version 18 has, if you look at Docker Hub, they're only 36 megs or something. So their base starting point is now about the same. They got rid of a lot of the cruft. So Alpine, it is amazing. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad I learned all those APK commands to do the upgrade or install packages. I just don't know if I'd rather have a more well-known base platform that more people can contribute to.
Well, I could also use Ubuntu Slim, which uses Alpine, I believe, but still is Ubuntu. Or it does something to be really thin, like as opposed to normal Ubuntu.
I think that may have been the precursor to the latest version, which is just skinny. Like it starts off skinny. Yeah, TerraPap, that they definitely are. So if anyone wants to go and check the Docker Hub tags page for Ubuntu or Debian, you'll see the sizes are remarkably small in the new versions. Like I was pleasantly surprised. I heard that they felt the need and the pressure from Alpine, and they clearly reacted appropriately. I use Alpine for my SSL proxy project. I do have a ability to compile it or build that image with Ubuntu. It's 40 megs larger, so instead of I think a total of 38 megs or 48 megs, it pushes closer to 100. Yeah, that's a lot when you're dealing with that size, so I chose Alpine. But when you're dealing with an image that is going to potentially be running lots of different languages or tool sets, or we want to bake some of those in, it's going to end up being like a gig bundle. There's no way around it. Just installing 2 versions of Python if you need, or there's a lot of different things in the mix, because I think the container will need to just be injected with the Git repo, pulls it in, and it has to be compatible with a predefined list of languages.
So maybe also, I guess not maybe, I could start with just the big full version, because in testing just my own thing, it doesn't really matter the sizes. It's when I deploy and I start setting it up that I have to really start caring about that. And I can start an Ubuntu just not caring about the size, and then once I understand how to get it working, I get that local MVP, I can then slim it down.
So I'm kind of assuming we'd be running these on one host with an overlay file system, so to be able to take advantage of sharing some of that file storage.
Piglacker, thanks for stopping by.
See ya, Biff. Yeah, so this is and there's various ways we can do the Docker design. That is we could allow the user to instrument and give us the commands to set up the environment. Oh, you need NVM and you want NVM to install Node 10? Cool, write a little install.sh script to bootstrap that, and then we'll run it. Because then we'd be able to get away with an image, an Ubuntu 40 meg image, and then maybe pass around to whatever.
That feels I guess to me it feels more of a security vulnerability if I'm going to give them people to just set up their own stuff. To me, I feel maybe the best thing to do would be just to say okay, here's these pre-baked choices, and as the project goes on, I can add more of them. So maybe initial one, you get Node 10. It has this much memory, it has this much CPU, and it's going to live for this long. And the command to run will be node main.js, and that's it.
And pip stars. Yeah.
And so if you have that, just have that in your default, and everything will be fine. Not even an npm install. It just has to be native code. Nothing's available. But I can also do things underscore or Lodash or any of the other libraries that you might want to rely upon are globally installed and available to you. You just have to require those in.
Yeah, and just having that, but then, we'd have to attend to those, same needs in many different, we want to make it so any language can, we want to make it so anyone can play. We don't want to limit access by the language, so we probably have to make the image, the image would be open source, of course.
Right.
So people, if someone's hey, I want to run Clojure script, or Clojure, or whatever, and I need the JVM or something bloated. That's one way to do it. Yeah, no, we'll. It doesn't really matter what permissions we run internally, as long as we don't let npm install needs network access, And if we're like just saying no network access, you have to send the repo in, all things included. Maybe that means you just commit your node modules.
Yeah, those are...
Because like that would be as assets, just the same as like machine learning or training models, or those sorts of assets. Like if you need these pre-built packages or binaries or whatever, just add them to the repo. We will download them and then inject them into the image.
Well, that was another idea, is would I want to create a single image that they use, or would I want to create the image at the time for each bot? So
what if two bots try and occupy the same coordinate space?
That's a good question that I'll...
That's a singularity. And, no, that's basically if this is a game of tag, it's the one who moved, basically.
I'll have to make that decision. So like as I'm building out the things, those are questions that'll come up and I'll answer them by writing the code to solve that right then.
Yeah, and it may be something that requires someone to make a mistake, which obviously they're not going to do in such a simple game. But yeah, if each bot only gets one move, then like you could just end up just running around in a circle. So that's like...
Well, and so like if I start seeing that kind of happen, which I'll be doing testing myself, like, hey, what happens if I do this?
We can add a one-up that makes you go twice as fast.
Based upon doing this, based upon the Battle Royale series of games, I'm going to have like a wealth of game design decisions that I can pull upon that I don't have to initiate. Like for example, shrinking the arena is a possibility until it's literally 1 pixel large.
So doesn't like Fortnite or something do that?
Every single Battle Royale does that.
See, I can talk games.
Mm-hmm.
I know this. It doesn't need to be an insecure registry. Like
I'm going to use Docker Hub. I'm just going to put these all out there. I'm not going to...
What's a Fortnite? Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not going to...
I hear it's a game popular with the kids these days. I hear Abe Lincoln used to play it. I'm not sure.
I don't see a reason for myself to hide anything on this game. I'm not really going to hide the source in order to try to sell and make as much money as possible. Being a learning project, this is also going to go into my resume as something that I made.
It's a dev challenge. Like you have to use different tools. It's fun to work within constraints to see what you're able to do. And this also lets you it forces you to rethink what you can do with given languages. The fact that you can that this is just going to be reduced down to this 2D grid space. It opens up all kinds of possibilities under the hood.
Yeah. So one idea, there's two sort of paths I was initially thinking of doing, which was at the beginning have a single Docker image that is already pre-created, and then I would spin off a container, hand it in the repo that it would have to npm install and then knock out its internet. I don't know if that's possible.
Well, you can just volume out that the cloned image.
That was inside the container doing the git clone.
No, I wouldn't do any, I do git clone on the
host
machine, and then just have a folder structure that maps to the names of each of the repos, and then make it so that person's image mounts to that,
Okay, so basically a volume mount.
Yeah, volume mount, which I know is a punching a hole through the security walls. But we could also rebuild the image based on, we could build a derived image as well there to slow it down.
So that was the other idea. If I do a git clone, so if I do a git clone on my host machine with the engine, and then so it gets the folder of that, and then I cd into that folder, and then I Docker build a copy of Docker file into there, and I Docker build there, and it has a copy where it copies in all their files. So it's not even punching the hole.
Yeah, no, that's exactly, yeah. So a derived image would be basically, here's the pattern of, we'll do the git clone, and then we just base the image off of our standard image, so that you just get all we're doing is mixing in the files, making that image, and then we just replay it. And then we could push it onto our own Docker registry in that case, and then it could be distributed.
I could do that, but then
that adds
people won't be able to update their Docker files because it gets added at image creation. I think it's more of I create that for local usage of that, and then delete the image right after.
Prefix the git hash.
Docker Home would get very upset if I started pushing like thousands.
Well, then we could run our own private registry for that.
Yeah. I was thinking like maybe that for initial version though is.
Yeah, that's what we could do for sure. But we do want to let you read-only volume mount would probably be just as safe. I just know it functions differently than if we built the image with the files, and that it does actually still have access to the file system on the host. So just to be security sensitive, I'm not sure what vulnerabilities exist there. I don't think there are. In order to just be on the safe side, and building if you've got a immutable image that is like, hey, we built it, we added this, everything just is built on immutable Git project with hashes and immutable Docker builds. It's very predictable. It's very hard for something to sneak in the middle there.
So maybe like my first version of the bot that I could run would just be in a thread and not even in Docker, but it would just be a node project that I run almost like manually.
Well, it'd be like an orchestrator.
Well, the Rust command would spin up a thread, and then in that thread it would run node space like main.js in another folder, and then it would just send it in, send it out, and move around. And then once I get that working, the next step would be do the same thing but in a Docker container. Okay, so I think that's actually going to be like starting tomorrow. Essentially, I'm going to start working on like these two steps first.
Okay. Can I work on the test side of it, or just do dummy in and out smoke test for maybe do success and fail tests, and then we can compare notes and finish them up?
Maybe so what do you mean by what kind of tests can we do?
So I want to see if you say move diagonally, and be like no. Okay, move up. Are you at the top right? What happens?
Oh, so how I give it feedback.
Yeah. I want to make sure that the instruction was responded and committed correctly in the game state. So that each state of the ASCII map has to reflect following the rules or following the input of each bot. So as it goes and asks each bot, hey, here's the state, give me give me the change you want to make. Okay, next bot, here's the state, give me the change you want to make. Okay, cool. So each change, it's making one move, and so we can view that history basically, and it's something I could hand code out and then basically make real.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. And I can also see as I build a bot that moves around, I'll run into those problems and sort of update my bot to handle it, then update my engine to work with that.
And these SSH stuff, we're not really we wouldn't need to use it because this is going to be only open source projects. I don't really feel it. I don't want to support people who don't support the cause. If you're going to play the game, you want to compete. And
it's just more of, if you're going to try to hack me, I want your code to have to be public so that we could publicly shame you.
Yeah, and if you want to fork someone else's work, they can get credit, and you can also get credit for the improvements you've made to their work. So there's we want to encourage that community dynamic.
I was also thinking each turn the state can include it could be standard in for the turn to the bot would be, okay, you here's the state of everything, and also here is the codes for how your last turn went. And it could be something like error, you cannot move to the right, you're at the edge.
Yeah, so just that'll be
so
defined as
make
static.
it, yeah.
So yeah, I'll work on that stuff, and then it'll just be the initial state of the simplest game. And even if it's an unwinnable game, it's just things that just can move one at a time, and you have to rely on someone making a mistake, going the wrong direction and crashing into you, or failing to move when they needed to get out of the way. Even a silly reduced game like that is a solid starting point. And that's when we can start adding in the spice that makes it interesting, or adding variability.
Yeah.
The feedback contains the current game state and
potentially previous moves. I think the idea is that I need to build this out first, and we're sort of going back and forth on this, but I think that's because we've reached the edge of what we can predict, and now it's going to be build it and just see what happens. And what is it? The plans never survive contact with reality, and that's just because I need to build it out. I need to build it and find out what happens, and then I can make decisions there. And if I make plans, those are plans that are guaranteed to be changed. So why even bother making too big of a plan and not just a vague one? I think that's going to be it for right now because we've been talking for like a solid hour or so.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I know. In fact, how long have we been? We've been an hour and a half. We've been live. So we're going to.
There she is again.
Yeah, no, I definitely wanted to keep on doing this. Meeting regular with this would be awesome, and sort of showing you the progress of it. I am probably going to be streaming tomorrow morning. I don't know how tired I'm going to be because obviously you have to go home and go to bed. I usually stream to those who are watching. I usually stream at 6:30 a.m. Mountain Time until around 7:30 a.m. and then I just sort of go off and do my normal J job. So I will be there tomorrow morning, and we'll just see how tired I am as I start building this out. I don't really have anything else. Dan, do you have any closing statements or remarks? Or
I think we've got a solid plan. I'm going to work on this tomorrow. I may record it or stream it or something as I'm playing around and building up getting my YouTube or Twitch game in gear. Yeah, I'll be posting on Twitter under my handle JustSML, and you can check it out there. I'll keep everyone posted.
Yeah, this has been sort of an experiment of doing a sort of a mentorship meeting live on stream because I don't really see those ever. And so if this is something that people would like to see, I'll do more of them if my mentors are okay with that.
I would love to.
You're okay with that, I know, but some of my other mentors may not be. So anyways, with that, we're out of here. So thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next time or whenever that is.
Yep. Thanks.
Oh, that's your computer.
Yep.
Here's mine. Stop.